Hello everyone and welcome to the first Olympic edition of the Debrief in association with Junior Rowing News. The eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that my name is in fact not Fergus Mainland, the usual host of this show, but I'm delighted to introduce myself as Tom Morgan, returning to the hot seat for the second time. Before I run you through our world-class guest lineup for today's preview show, I am delighted to announce that we'll be hosting daily breakfast debriefs throughout the Olympic regatta, hosted in tandem by myself and the famous Fergus, and designed to keep you up to speed with the stories unfolding overnight on the glistening Tokyo waters. So keep your eyes peeled for the first in-regatta episode to drop on Friday morning via British Rowing Plus. So let's turn to today's show, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Mark Hunter, 2 times Olympic medalist, Zoe De Toledo, coxswain of the silver medal winnings Women's 8 in Rio, and Sarah Cook, recently appointed Chief Operating Officer at Rowing Australia and 2 times Olympian. Quite the panel, I'm sure you'll agree, and the perfect combination to take us through the runners and riders for the rescheduled 2020 Olympic Rowing Regatta. We're going to whiz through the various sections, and I'm going to throw to each of you in turn, but let's start with the men's heavyweight suite, the pair, the 4 and the 8. Mark, what's your take on the start list for these events?
Yeah, I think if we start with what you just started there, Tom, with the men's pair, I think obviously the Sinkovic brothers, I'm really interested to see if they can be. I think it'll be the first combination to go from one discipline of the sport to another and be Olympic champions. And obviously being the premier crew in that event, it'd be interesting to see how they progress. And, you know, obviously with the challenging times that everybody gone through, no one really knows exactly where they are. So it adds a bit more excitement to the Olympic regatta, I think. If we move on to the men's 4, I think the blue ribbon event for our nations especially, I'm looking forward to hopefully another Aussie GB battle, and we'll see where the Italians come in and the Poles. So I think that's another really interesting outlook there. And I think if we move into the bigger boat, you know, which people do say is a blue ribbon event, the men's 8, I think the battles between the Brits and the Germans through this season have been absolutely incredible, especially with that finish in Lucerne. And it'd be interesting to see who's going to have the edge come the Olympic Games, but obviously bringing the Kiwis into the mix. I think they looked extremely good at that qualification regatta, so I wouldn't count them out the mix. And obviously the Dutch, you know, they can come good at the right time. And then the Americans, no one has a clue about any American crew, so it's going to be really interesting. I think that just adds to the excitement of the regatta. So those are the kind of big picks. The Sinkovic brothers in the men's pair. I'm going to go with the GB4 in the men's 4, and obviously I'm going to go with home win again for the GB men's 8. So yeah, that's my 3 big picks in the men's suite.
And Sarah, Mark hinted at it there, but what's the download on the Australian camp? Where and when do you disagree?
Yeah, look, this Games is so interesting, isn't it? Because this extra year has done a couple of things for the more experienced athletes who've been in the system waiting for the Olympics to have to go that extra year. I think it'll have an impact. But similarly for the up and coming either squads or athletes have really had the opportunity to burst onto the scene, and a number of them are untested. You know, we haven't seen much of the Aussies, the Kiwis, the Canadians, the Americans, basically all the non-European countries, more or less, other than those that made it over to final Olympic and Paralympic qualifiers. So it's a really interesting situation, and I've had the benefit, obviously, of watching the Australian team. We've had simulation World Cup regattas here in Australia with our underage teams, which aren't travelling to World Championships. They've been racing the Olympic team. And so to see the results from 2019 and to see the results on speed now, I'm pretty excited about where things are for the Australians. I think the women's squad, which we'll talk about soon, has just been on an amazing trajectory. The men, there's been some shifting, and I think sculling will be interesting. We'll talk about that later as well. But in terms of the sweep, I'll get back on to message. In terms of sweep, we've got a pretty new look men's 8, a lot of debutantes, some really, really young guys there in their very early 20s. I think the youngest is actually 20 years old in the men's 8. So the men's 8, very much a development boat with a couple of key guys there. Josh Booth, 3 times Olympian and Olympic silver medalist in that crew. They've sort of been trying to pull things together as a new combination coming into the games. So they don't have a lot of, pedigree with that crew. The men's pair from 2019, Josh and Sam, who won the bronze medal, I think that they're big race day performers. They've been selected because they made the podium in 2019, and I'd expect them to be making the podium But I really agree, the Sinkovic brothers, I mean, how dominant are they going to be? And then in the men's four, we've got, I guess, 3/4 of the crew back together that won the World Championship in 2017 and 2018. So I definitely would pick the Aussies to be up there. But the Italians, I mean, that's kind of the surprise packet for me. But when I saw that British men's four in Lucerne, I just thought, oh my gosh, this is a crew to beat. So yeah, I agree with you, Mark. That was a very long answer to give you the same answer. But I think Aussies, British and Italians in that men's four.
Well, I just want to add to that as well, because if you'd have asked me these questions a year ago, I wouldn't have put Britain in any chance to win the gold medal, being honest. But that extra year and what it's done for our team has elevated it, and they took it as an opportunity to improve, get better. And I'm really excited about the regatta now, where if it had been a year ago, I'd have been a bit, where the medal's going to come from. So, yeah, hopefully not overexcited. That's what I'm hoping.
And Zoe, throwing to you, touching on the point that Mark made around how much of a benefit the extra year has been for the men's side. On the women's sweep side, obviously, the place that you used to spend a lot of time, how do you see the event shaping up in the pair, the 4 and the 8 across the various nations?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the men's side, I think there's those 2 really good shots for gold. I think on the women's side, we've obviously got the extra boat qualified, so we've got the women's pair as well. In comparison to the men. But I suspect maybe on the women's side, our crews are more sort of in the middle of that pack rather than necessarily leading right from the front. Having said that, of course, I don't think we can discount that women's pair. I mean, I think everyone will know Helen and Polly back together. I think they are phenomenal athletes and they know how to win, they know how to race, and they're both capable of performing under pressure, even though they're going to be coming up against crews that they haven't raced. And like Sarah said, that's the thing that's, I guess, both nerve-wracking and exciting about this regatta. There are so many crews who haven't raced each other. I mean, I think for the women's pair, you know, the big crew is obviously the Kiwi crew. The Aussies, the Canadians, the US have all also got strong crews, and those are all crews that Helen and Polly have yet to race. I think I would put good money on Helen and Polly being on the podium. I wouldn't quite want to say where yet until we see their first race, but you know, I think they're going to have been pushing on a long way in this little time that they've had together. Women's 4, you know, likewise, I think that's a medalist crew from our GB athletes. Again, I think, you know, there are some crews that they've raced who I think are going to be up there, the Dutch and the Irish in particular, probably the crews that they've raced so far that are, you know, going to be up there and pushing, Netherlands in particular, probably right to the top of the podium. Australia and the USA, I mean, the US, you just can't discount any of their sweep boats. You have no idea how they've been going. And this Olympiad hasn't been as strong for them as previous ones have, perhaps. But you know that they've got that depth. You know that they've got the pedigree. You know that they have done this before and they know how to do it. So you don't want to discount them either. Women's 8, I think that might be more of a challenge for our crew. Again, I think almost all the big competition there comes from outside of Europe, crews they haven't raced yet. You know, they've raced the Romanians, who we know are always sort of in the mix. Who beat them at the Europeans, but then then that Romanian crew went to the qualification regatta and got quite soundly beaten by a Chinese crew, which we've never seen before. Likewise, you know, you're going to have the Australians, you're going to have the Americans, you're going to have the Kiwis, and I think the Kiwis potentially might be real ones to watch there. So I'm really excited, I've got to say, for the women's 8s racing. I think it's going to be really interesting and potentially very, very quick racing.
And Sarah, I think this is going to become a running theme. Clearly, we've got 2 contributors on here who have their colours firmly nailed to the GB mast, and you perhaps providing more of an international perspective on things. But in terms of the women's sweep events, how do you see it playing out from your perspective, particularly with your Antipodean knowledge?
Well, I don't know that I could claim to be sort of the rest of the world. I am unashamedly backing the Aussies here, I think. But yeah, look, it's been a really incredible cycle for New Zealand and Australia in the women's sweep categories, both of which have not been traditionally that strong at an Olympic level. They've had some success along the way at World Championships, but not as a system have I seen either the Australians or the Kiwis in this kind of position in women's sweep ever. I think the women's A, I'm really tipping New Zealand, Australia, USA to be the three crews on the podium, and I will put my trans-Tasman rivalry aside and say it would just be a fairy tale to see that New Zealand women's 8 win that event, having never done it before. I mean, neither has Australia, obviously, but they won the World Championship in 2019, and I know a number of those girls, many of them I rode against throughout my career, and it is just such a lesson, I think, in tenacity and persistence and sticking together as a group, and it's really, I think, would be a fantastic end to their journey if they could take that win, but would be equally as happy to see the Aussies do it. But I think from my perspective, those are probably the top three in the women's 8, but anything could happen with what's happened over the last 18 months or so. The women's 4, we're seeing a new look Aussie 4, so it isn't the 4 that won the World Championships in 2019. There's only one returning member, but interestingly, doubling up the women's pair into the 4. So is that a gamble, or is it going to pay off? I can tell you that both the 4 and the pair for Australia are lightning fast. The speeds that they are doing are phenomenal. So if they can pull it off, and noting that Tokyo is challenging weather conditions, hot and humid, but they have practiced backing up events in a short period of time at our simulation regattas, and they have been extremely, extremely fast. So I think watch that Australian women's 4 pair. If they can pull it off, it could be a clean sweep of those two events. But again, I'd echo what Zoe said with the US. There's some really strong women in that 4. Grace Luchak, I think, is in the stroke seat, Madeline Wanamaker. So some really strong women in that US women's 4. Watch out for them. But the Dutch have kind of been the form crew in that event. And of course, as you said, Zoe, the Irish were so impressive at final Olympic qualifiers. So the whole Irish team really seems to be on this upward trajectory. So really exciting to see their women starting to get a bit of momentum in the bigger boats. Women's pair, the Kiwis are doubling up their pair and their 8, where the Aussies are doing the pair and the 4. I think it's going to be tough to beat that Kiwi pair, but like I said, the Aussie women, Jess Morrison and Annabelle McIntyre, have been incredibly fast. So I think those are probably the two crews that are going to be fighting it out for the gold medal in that women's pair race, I think. But absolutely would not write off Helen and Polly. The athletes with that experience, like you said, Zoe, they know how to step up for a race day, and they have the performances there. So anything could happen. It could be a fairy tale return for Helen.
I guess it's also worth touching on the doubling up as well, because I think, I was thinking about it earlier, and I was thinking, okay, well, if you're rowing in the single, then you're going to be doing 4 races as a minimum. Whereas in the 8, if you get through your heat, then you're going straight to the final. You could only be doing 2 races. Having said that, the early rounds in the singles, I think if you're a top performer, medalist, sculler, then those early rounds can be held fairly in control. Whereas in an event like the 8s and in an event like the women's pairs, those early races are always really ferocious. You're not going to be able to just back off and just say, okay, well, I can just get myself out in front and control this race, unless you are a really exceptional crew. So whilst it might not sound like too much, saying, oh, they might have to do 4, 5, 6 races. Well, okay, the women's scullers are doing 4. It is different. It is a different kind of racing. So I think that's going to be interesting to see how those crews do as the regatta progresses. Like you said, the Kiwis and the pair in the 8, and the 4 and the Aussies in the pair in the 4.
I think it comes to all that recovery element that kind of Sarah touched on. The kind of process is, once you do one race, you're starting to prepare for the next, and making sure that all those protocols are in place, because it is going to be, we know it's going to be really humid out there. You can see all the athletes walking around with umbrellas in their pictures, trying to keep in the shade, trying to stay hydrated, obviously, and just making sure that they recover as quickly as possible. So that whole kind of, when they finish racing, to start the wind down and process it for the next one is going to be so important that people are doubling up and racing on, consecutive days.
Amazing. Well, I thought you were going to commit blasphemy at the beginning of this, Sarah, and not mention Helen Glover in your pairs preview, but thankfully you recovered. Let's move forward to the sculling side of things, and let's have a look at the men's and women's sculling. So, Mark, let me come to you first on the men's sculling side. Give me your brief download on who we should be looking out for.
Well, I think the men's single event, I think for me is probably one of the most exciting events. You know, what we saw at the World Championships back in 2019 when it was like a blanket finish between the first 4 or 5. If we can get something like that again, maybe reliving Mahe and Demir's kind of finish in Rio, if we get something similar in Tokyo, I think it'd be an exceptional event, an exceptional final. And I think for me, Oliver Zilder is obviously the favourite in my eyes. You know, when I saw him burst onto the scene, he was obviously a physical specimen, was obviously having to learn how to race and be competitive. And you could just see his progression just going through the roof. And, you know, obviously his confidence this season, the way he's been racing, but there's so many people that could take that title. It's not a standout one just going to walk away with it. Maybe if you look at the men's quad, you'd say the Dutch quad, if they get it right, then they're just in a different league compared to everybody else. But in the men's single, I do think that is open to probably 3 or 4 different people could win that. And I mentioned the German sculler being the top one. Obviously, the Danish sculler, Nielsen, another good close contender. He's always got that silver medal. Is this going to be the one where he gets the gold? Demir Martin, obviously, has been there, being close to it. Is he going to get back on track and live it up and deliver in the final? So I think it's going to be really interesting. Obviously, Kessel Bosch is another one to look out for. So I think it's one of those events you just don't know. You know, we'll see what happens when the final comes about. In the men's double, I think it's going to be really exciting. We saw that another gut-buster finish with the Chinese double and the Irish double. Once again, another Irish boat that's pushing its way into the medal zone. And is it again going to be between those two, 1 and 2 again, or are they going to flip around the positions? And I think for me, it'd be the race behind them. It'd be really interesting who gets the bronze. I think those 2 nations will be standout, and then there'd be 4 boats racing for potentially 1 medal. So that could be quite interesting. And then we touched on the Dutch quad, the men's quad being probably the most standout boat in probably the regatta. If they get it right, they are just incredible when they're on song, and they showed that in Lucerne again. But I think a really interesting one for me is Olaf Tuft racing the Norwegian quad. You know, how the hell is that guy still going? I just don't know. But to see how he brings on this new quartet of athletes with him, I would never count him out, because as we talked about, he's been there, done it before. He's got a bigger engine room behind him now with 3 other people, so that'll be interesting. So to see how he copes with that. But then in that particular event, you've got the Italians. You know, yes, this is an event they love doing, and they're normally very successful at it. The British, we'll see how they go. They're hot and miss when it comes to a final. They seem to be very good in the early rounds, but can they really step on in a major final now? That is the big question for me. And then Estonia, you know, a bunch of old guys got together again, and seeing if they can deliver another Olympic medal for Estonia. So for me, that's the kind of insight to those particular events. And once again, we don't really know, because no one's raced everyone, but it just adds to the excitement again of the events.
And we touched on it there about the Dutch quad being just sensational and incredible scullers. Zoe, do we think there's a similar story going on in the women's quad? Do we think perhaps the Chinese are the crew to beat there?
Yeah, I think the Chinese are going to be really interesting. It's really difficult because, again, you know, we keep saying this, but we haven't seen any of these people race, and I think the Chinese sort of historically tend to do these cycles of, well, you don't even see them race for a couple of years, or they may be, you know, one crew, and then suddenly they will appear in full force before the games and you know, put out a lot of really successful crews. And obviously, you know, Steve Redgrave out there, Paul Thompson out there, these are very experienced people. And that women's quad has, you know, in terms of the event for China, has form. So I think that is definitely one, you know, to keep an eye on. Our young British crew will be really interesting to see how they do. You know, they've put in some really exciting performances, but it hasn't been, I don't think, that consistent. But, you know, I'd want to keep an eye on them, because they might be sort of climbing up there onto the podium, hopefully, if they can get things right.
And Sarah, the women's single, women's double, what are your predictions there? I know you've got a bit of a penchant for Emma Twigg.
Yes, I do. I'm a bit of a fangirl when it comes to Emma Twigg. this is her fourth Olympics, and I think what happened leading up to 2016 was really tough for her, both personally and professionally. And I just feel like it's her, it's her time, right? So I would love to see Twiggy take out the women's single. It would be, just fantastic for New Zealand and for her on a personal level. I think obviously that the shock of the season is Hannah Prakatsin from Russia and her dominance of the women's single. Based on her form this season, I don't know that I see anyone challenging her for it, to be honest. Of course, Sunita Puspura, the Irish sculler, world champion from 2019. She'll absolutely be a contender for the podium, as will Vicky Thornley, Olympic medalist, and obviously with pedigree in both the single and the double now. So, look, I think they're probably the top four or so. Which way it'll go will be anyone's call, but based on form, I find it hard to go past the dominance that we've seen from Prakatsin of Russia at this point. In the women's double, look, things are a bit more open in the women's double. I think it's interestingly, New Zealand have switched out Liv Lowe into stroke of the quad, and Hannah Osborne has come into that boat. So I don't have the backstory there, so I'm really interested to see if Hannah, I guess, broke her way into that world champion double to take that position, or if Liv has gone into the quad to try and strengthen that boat. So I'm not sure. I'm interested to see a read on that in the double and the quad. But yeah, totally open. I think it's a really exciting event, the women's double this time around. In terms of the women's quad, of course, the Aussies came through final Olympic qualification and they won that, but they are a young crew. They're all debutantes. I think that they'll find it hard to make it onto the podium. It's a tough event, but I really find it hard to go past China. They've been the standout crew, the first Chinese crew to win at Henley Royal Regatta. Back when we could last have one. Obviously, we're a few weeks out, not that I'll be there, sadly, but, I think that was an incredible moment for Chinese rowing and for that women's quad. So I really find it hard to think that anyone would beat them in that event.
I think the women's single could be really exciting, like you say. I mean, there's also the US sculler Caracola, there's Gamelin, Lobnig, Zeman from Canada. So there's a huge field there. And I think, I think Emma Twigg, also fantastic sculler. I would say from a personal perspective, my fangirling is usually over Sunita. I just think she's a great person, and, she's a sort of big icon in Ireland now, and, mother to two kids, and she's really fantastic. So I'm hoping to see her push up there and do well. But, like Prakatsin, I think the Prakatsin Twigg Sunita battle is going to be really exciting.
And let's wrap then with the lightweights. Mark, I've got to come to you first as obviously a former lightweight Olympian. Tell me your answer first on the lightweights. Where should we be looking?
Yeah, well, I go straight for the lightweight women's double because obviously we have a lightweight women's double in that particular event. So yeah, I'm really excited about this. Obviously, the girls, Imogen and Emily, have progressed massively over this lockdown period. They've come on tremendously. They've grown as a combination. It's been really exciting to see them develop as a unit rather than two individuals. Now they're a proper double now. But obviously they were going really well. They won Lucerne, so they looked in great shape. And then the Dutch go to the last World Cup and absolutely destroy the world record. So I think that was expected. I spoke to Darren and he said that gold medal time wasn't where it should be. So he was expecting it to go to 6:44. And I know they just went under that. So that's a huge benchmark and a kind of, they've really put their flag in the stall. So it'd be really interesting whether the Brits can actually elevate themselves and get themselves on par with the Dutch. But that's with the women's lightweight double. I think the Dutch and the Brits is the big rivalry there in that particular event. But don't count out Romania. They will be hot on their tails. And also France is a very good contender in that event. But if the Dutch, once again, if they deliver what they've done, as a men's squad have done, it's going to be really tough to take them down. But my backing is definitely with the Brits. They've got that gutsiness between them, and I think that they can deliver something really special come the regatta. For the men's lightweight double, you can't look past the Irish combination, McCarthy and Donovan. They just look so much more powerful than everyone else. You know, it's been a pleasure to watch them be able to win from every situation, every scenario. They don't get flustered. They're so confident in their boat speed. It doesn't matter what anybody else does. The only way that someone's going to overhaul them is if they get sick, something happens, they have to isolate. That for me is the only way that anybody's going to stop these two. I think the race will be behind them for the minor medals with Italy, Norway and Germany. I think that's going to be a real interesting battle behind them. But just with the form guide and what I've seen and what they've done this season, I can't see anybody touching the Irish.
Yeah, certainly hard to look past the Irish for the lightweight men's double. So let's finish off with a quick fire round then. So Zoe and Mark, clearly GB allegiances, and Sarah in Australia. Zoe, Mark, give me your medal count for GB. Zoe, let's come to you first. How many medals do you think GB are going to win?
I'm going to say 4 to 5.
4 to 5. Mark?
I was actually going to say exactly the same number. I was at an event last night and someone asked me the question. I said 4 or 5. There could be some really strong medals. It could be 3 golds, or it could be 1 gold or no gold. But I think there's a real good chance of 4 to 5 medals.
And Sarah, I know you're eminently Australian through and through. Give us, as far as you can, the unbiased prediction on how many medals. Australia can't win all the golds.
Damn it. I was going to say 14, even though we only have 9 boats qualified. No, I really, and I've said this a few times, I think that this Australian rowing team could be the most successful we've ever had. I really believe that. And I think our most successful team was Atlanta 96. I think that we could be in the realm of 5 to 6 medals. 3 for the men and 3 for the women is my tip.
Who do you think is going to come top of the medals table? I'll chuck that one in there to everyone.
Oh. In terms of total medals or gold medals?
The gold medals, yeah.
Gold medals. I think that, look, I'm not going to, I don't know that I can say one, but I do think that the Dutch, the Australians, the British and the Kiwis all have multiple gold medal chances, I would say. So I think that it's probably I think those are the four top countries as my pick.
And I think the other country we're going to see pushing up onto the medal table is Ireland, which is spectacular given how small a country it is. So I think that's one, maybe not at the top and not with the most golds, but I think that'll be, in terms of power to weight ratio, so to speak, I think that's going to be a big one.
Mark, any disagreements?
No, I totally agree with both what Sarah and Zoe have said there. I think the Kiwis will edge the medal table. That's my gut feeling. But I think the Irish will be pushing up there with obviously the women's single, the men's double, the lightweight men's double. If that all comes off of them, it could be an exceptional game for the Irish team.
100%. Well, look, it's going to be a really exciting regatta. We can't wait for it. Naturally starved of Olympic action for a year. We're back from Friday morning. And thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mark, for joining and giving us your predictions. We'll see how they bear out over the next sort of 10 days or so. But for now, this has been the Debrief, British Rowing Association with Junior Rowing News, and we'll be back on Friday morning.